Okay, so it's 3 p.m. sharp in Manila now, so I think we can get started as people are still dropping in. I see. So welcome everyone. My name is Johanna Siliakus. I work for the Transport Sector Office at the Asian Development Bank at ADB. And I'm very pleased to welcome you to this e-mobility community meeting on just transition and e-mobility. So the discussion is held under the umbrella of the e-mobility support and investment platform for Asia and the Pacific, which aims to build capacity and support the scale-up of financing of e-mobility initiatives. And it works a lot on knowledge sharing initiatives as well. The e-mobility platform is managed by ADB. It's co-financed by the Global Environment Facility, the GEF, and co-implemented by UNEP. So today's session takes form of a panel discussion where we will be discussing just transition in e-mobility. And in this session, we'll be asking the question whether this transition is a just transition or if it's just a transition. As part of the discussion, we'll explore the evolving landscape of e-mobility and its impact on the labor market through this lens of just transition. And you'll hear about some of the opportunities, the barriers, challenges that relate to making a fair and just transition to e-mobility in Asia and the Pacific and beyond. We'll also hear examples from Germany. So yeah, let me pass over to our colleague Tom Fleming. He's representing the implementing partner, Integrated Transport Planning, which support us in the implementation of the e-mobility support and investment platform. He will be taking us through the agenda and the house rules, as well as presenting our panelists. So let me hand over to Tom. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Johanna. Good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you're joining us from. Next slide, please. Perfect. So here we have the agenda on screen. So following a brief introduction from Johanna and myself, we'll be diving into the main body of the session, which will begin with some presentations, some short sort of bite-sized presentations on the topic of just transition from our esteemed panelists. These will focus on showcasing some of their work, as well as some of the challenges that they see through their particular lens, and before we dive into a more detailed panel discussion, which will be moderated by Bertrand Gourlou. And then we'll have hopefully some time at the end for question and answer with our audience before we wrap up and close. So that's a brief overview of our agenda today. Next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of house rules, those of you who have attended our webinars before will be familiar with these, but they are slightly different today. So please, as usual, keep your microphones muted unless you're invited to speak. There may be opportunity to raise your hand during a question and answer session if you'd like clarification on a particular answer that's given, for example. But I think generally we want to allow the flow of the session to kind of run its course. However, if you do have any questions, any comments, or you'd just like to introduce yourself, please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen. It'd be great to learn who's here today and where you're joining us from, etc. And if you have any questions for any of the presentations kind of pique your interest and you want to ask something, I'm sure our panelists today will be happy to respond to them in the chat. And then if you have any questions, importantly during the panel discussion session a little bit later on, please put them in the Q&A, which is the box next to the chat, and the moderating team will pick them up and put them to our panelists when we get to the Q&A. And just to highlight finally that this meeting is recorded, so don't say anything that you don't want more widely shared. Thank you. Next slide, please. Super. Okay, so we'll kick things off with a series of presentations on the topic of just transition. This slide present our panelists today. So we have Swati Michel de Souza from ADB. We have Juman Kuba, we have Christian Hochfeld, and Chaitanya Kanuri as well. So I'll introduce them in turn shortly, just in advance of their presentations. So next slide, please. Super. Okay, so first of all, I'd like to introduce Swati. Swati is a climate change specialist at Asian Development Bank, where she leads ADB's Just Transition work for the Energy Transition Mechanism Initiative, and she works with ADB's Just Transition Support Platform as well. Prior to joining ADB, Swati worked at the International Energy Agency in India, and she's also credited with co-founding the India Zero Emissions Vehicle Center at University of California, Davis. So Swati, without further ado, I'll hand the floor to you.
Thank you, Tom. Can we go to the next slide? The next slide. So my presentation today is to set the context for the discussion that we are having. It goes through what exactly we mean by just transition in general, and then what it will mean like when we think about the transport sector in particular, and what are some of the likely impacts that we're going to see as the transport sector decarbonizes, and how should we start thinking about how to mitigate some of these impacts that we've seen. So far, over the last 2 decades, efforts to transition away from fossil fuels have focused primarily on coal and coal-bearing regions. In fact, the entire conversation on just transition actually stems from coal-bearing regions to ensure that the transition away from fossil fuels does not negatively impact these communities. But when we think about the transport sector, given the mobile nature of the sector, how do we then place this from a just transition context? And that is something that we need to start thinking about. Go to the next slide, please. So very briefly, the concept of just transition is actually not new. The term originated in the labor movements in the US in the 1970s. It was co-opted by the environment movement around the 1980s and 1990s. From a climate change perspective, this term is relatively new. The context is relatively new. And because of that, there is no single globally accepted definition of just transition. There are multiple different definitions, as you can see on the screen. You have the ITUC, you have the ILO. Each of them have their own definition. And one of the reasons for this is also because just transition comes across is a very outcome-based process, and it therefore needs to be contextualized to the country or the community or the sector that we are looking at it from. Some of the basic tenets, although which is maximizing social, economic, institutional opportunities of climate action, is widely accepted. Just transition also may come across as a reactionary risk-based agenda because it's always spoken in the context of where coal jobs being lost or fossil fuel sector jobs being lost. But the lens is actually to look at it from an opportunity-based perspective. So if you look at decarbonization from a just transition lens, what it ends up doing is it allows you to think about the transition from a managed transition perspective. And then you link this to labor market changes, to understanding the financial and the economic impacts across all stakeholder groups. What role can the government play in this context, so on and so forth. Next slide, please. So the ADB's institutional approach to just transition is still in the process of being formed, but we take our guidance from the MDB just transition high-level principles, which are the 5 principles that you can see on the screen. These are the first 2 of these principles, which is deliver climate objectives while enabling socioeconomic outcomes and moving away from GHG emissions intensive economic activities. explicitly highlight an overarching objective of supporting the delivery of nationally determined contributions, long-term GHG emissions, and climate resilience strategies through just transition pathways. Now, guided by these principles, MDBs, including ADB, are engaging with their member countries to support a just transition that is aligned with the country priorities and fits the operational context of that particular MDB. This includes mobilizing resources to support countries through dedicated technical assistance and financing, aligning relevant initiatives and programs, and delivering just transition support through operations, mainstream just transition in operations, policies, and strategies, including for ADB, and providing knowledge and collaborating with other stakeholders and development partners. Next slide, please. So I want to spend some time on this particular slide. This is a stylized transport sector supply chain and value chain. I actually wanted to put a coal sector one to show you the contrast, because the number of actors, the moment you start thinking about the transport sector, just double. Because here you're not just thinking about the entire value chain, which is automobile creation, but you're also then focusing on the fuel supply chain, which is your entire oil and gas supply chain. Um, when we start thinking about a national strategy on transport decarbonization, typically we need to identify, assess, and understand the impacts that take place throughout the supply chain and value chain. Broadly, the box to the top left shows you the four major impacts. I will not go in detail on each of these impacts, as my other co-panelists will focus on some of these impacts in much more detail. But typically, you have social impact, which is your impact on employment. You have the financial impact on revenues for businesses, on the overall books for domestic financial institutions who have interest and loans given to the automobile sector. You have economic impact on the fiscal health of government budgets. This is both in fossil fuel producing as well as consuming countries. In producing countries, the impact is seen in the form of any royalties that you would earn on oil and gas, but even in petroleum product consuming countries, a lot of them actually rely on the taxes on petrol and diesel to help balance to help not just balance their budget, but also to provide revenues for a bunch of different activities within the government. Um, and then, of course, you have the cultural impact, which is the automotive cluster and the communities that have been formed around these clusters in different countries, right? Now, one of the key challenges, you can see that there are two separate supply chains. And honestly, the reason why I have separated this out is to show right now we actually have two separate supply chains globally, where you do have the ICE supply chain that's continuing, but then there is a new supply chain on the electric vehicle side that's actually coming across in different countries. Um, the challenge going forward is first to merge the supply chains and then to eventually supplement the ICE supply chain with the electric vehicle supply chain. Now, in the process of doing this, there is likely to be issues linked to volatility, issues linked to transition risk. There is also likely to be issues linked to competitive advantage. All of those will rear their head. But the four impacts that are on top will end up impacting the sector, irrespective of whether we think of merging, whether we think of supplementing the supply chain. Um, Over here, there is an opportunity. So the green bar, including the electricity supply chain at the bottom, presents an opportunity rather than a cost. The fuel supply chain could come across as a cost, but then because we can also supplement it from both the electricity as well as the green supply chain, it does help in representing an opportunity, which can actually come across if we think about national transport decarbonization strategies. Next slide, please. So keeping in mind the supply chain diagram, there are interventions that are needed at the national level, at the subnational level, at the district and community level, and at the asset level, right? So at the asset level, typically, which could be one particular automotive cluster, or it could be a particular industry. The cluster approach could come from a community lens. The national approach could come from a national sectoral decarbonization lens. On your left, there are some key upstream, midstream, and downstream intervention areas that I have highlighted. The reason I have kept them as broad as possible is because in every country that we are working in, we may require all three at the same time. We may require only the upstream part at right now, or we may start from the downstream and then help build the upstream strategy. This basically interlinks across, therefore, all the levels in the onion that you have seen. I am going to stop now, but very happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Swati. That was a really useful introduction for us, and good to learn of ADB's approach to just transition as well. I know there's lots to unpack in that we'll hopefully get into in the panel discussion as well. So thank you. Next up, I'd like to introduce Juman Kuba. Juman is Just Transition and Sustainable Transport Advisor at the International Transport Workers Federation, the ITF. The ITF represents 16.5 million workers in over 700 trade unions across more than 150 countries. And Juman's work focuses on strategic research and international policy development within the transport sector. And prior to joining ITF, Juman worked as an engineering and a construction lawyer. So Juman, thank you for joining us today. Over to you.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks, Swati, for that introduction. So next slide, please. And the next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. Oh, there we go. Thank you. So I'll just explain briefly what we're talking about from the workers' perspective, looking first at decarbonisation through e-mobility, and then briefly adaptation, and then just very, very quickly a few examples of what just transition can mean in practice. So when we look at decarbonisation through e-mobility, there are both opportunities and challenges when you look at the issue of just transition. If planned well with appropriate social dialogue and as part of a coordinated transport strategy, it can be a really positive opportunity, not only for reducing carbon emissions and promoting modal shift, but also by driving decent jobs, expanded opportunities for groups such as women workers, and improvements to working conditions. However, there are challenges. If a fragmented approach is taken without due consideration of social dimensions, you can end up in quite difficult situations where you have workers displaced, job losses, which have wider economic and social ramifications, including protests and other concerns like that. You can also have the need to recoup costs associated with the e-mobility process, resulting in limiting access to e-mobility modes, particularly for those most in need of being able to access. And that can also lead to gaps in the wider transport framework because of the way that the whole situation is set up, which can lead to things like other forms of informal mobility rising, which leads to congestion and undermining of climate goals. So it can go very positively or not. And you can see pictures of both just to give you a sense. Next slide, please. Alongside the decarbonisation piece, we also need to think about how e-mobility fits in with the climate changes we're already seeing on the ground. We're already seeing changing temperatures and extreme weather events becoming more frequent and severe. And it's crucial that e-mobility actually takes account of that alongside all forms of transport. So the UN's International Labour Organization estimates that by 2030, 2.2% of total working hours will be lost because of higher temperatures, a loss equivalent to 80 million full-time jobs, which has an estimated cost of $2.4 billion globally. That's just one aspect of climate change, and it's really important that any new change, any big shifts such as e-mobility, really take account of that, particularly for those who are most exposed to those kinds of harms, such as women and young workers who are concentrated in precarious and informal jobs. If you don't do that, then you end up with situations where you have huge harms associated with the systems, because they're just not set up for the new climate realities we're facing. So next slide, please. So what does that mean in practice? So Swati briefly talked about what just transition means. Just to explain that a little bit further, there has been some really positive progress with agreeing a joint approach to what just transition means, with labour groups, trade unions, governments and employers all working together on just transition guidelines through the International Labour Organization, and a resolution was produced last year which sets out quite a lot of detailed provisions for just transition overall, which we would say actually would be a central focus that everyone can refer to. But in terms of the transport sector, what does that actually mean? Well, firstly, we'd be looking at an approach which involves strategic planning, which looks at all e-mobility alongside other forms of sustainable transport, and mainstreaming just transition throughout, with a real focus on social dialogue. So from the outset, you are talking to workers and having consultations with the wider community, so that those wider social issues are brought in all the way through. It's critical that workers shape the approach. I'm not going to go into detail, but we've seen a lot of examples of for example, in the Philippines, a lot of people will be familiar with the modernization program that was brought in there with the phasing out of jeepneys. There were a lot of issues that came about because of that process, because the social dimensions weren't considered upfront. That led to a national strike and ultimately a changed approach, which involved allowing jeepney workers to form cooperatives so they could bid and have priority bids for existing routes and a longer phase-out period. There are still, however, ongoing tensions, and the whole process has been much more complex than it needed to be. And that can be avoided by looking at those issues up front. Similarly, we've seen issues where, for example, things like climate harms haven't been thought about in advance of processes, and that's led again to strikes and other concerns. And ultimately, there have been changes like agreements to install air conditioning, but that's come about because of tensions, not because they've been thought about up front. So we're looking at how to change that. One positive way forward has been the formation of just transition committees. That's something that's been used in different spaces to bring together worker voices with company voices and sometimes with government voices in order to agree approaches overall around jobs plan, skills, conditions, technologies. You're also looking increasingly at the use of labour and social impact assessments, and there's a lot of learnings we have on how that can be done for areas like informal workers, women workers, etc., to try and identify issues up front and make sure that's part of the process. And finally, it's important it's not only talk, but that actually any dialogue actually results in agreements that can be reference points and make sure that they can be brought into overall approaches as things move forward. For us, if you can do that, you end up having an e-mobility process which is good for the climate and works for society overall. And that's something that we're really hoping that these kinds of conversations can lead us to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shuman. And I think it's really important that we don't overlook the workers' perspective in all of this. Sometimes it's the temptation is to a high strategic level, but how impact people on the ground is really, really important to consider. So thank you for that. And I'm sure we'll dive a little bit further into that during our panel discussion as well. Okay, so next up, I would like to welcome Christian Hochfeldt. Christian is Executive Director at Agora Verkehrswende. Christian has previously served as Head of Program for Sustainable Transportation in China at GIZ. He has also been a member of the Expert Group Transformation of the Automotive Industry at the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action in Germany. And he was previously a member of the Advisory Board of the Chinese Electric Vehicle Forum as well. So Christian, without further ado, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tom. And also a very warm welcome from my side. A good afternoon to all of you in Asia and a good morning to our colleagues here in Europe. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to participate in this important webinar today and to give you some examples from the German case on how we discussed the just transition in the relation to the electrification of road transport in Germany, how this will change the industry and what it means for policymakers, but also for the industry itself. You could imagine that the automotive sector in Germany is quite strong, and that this was discussed very intensely throughout the process of setting the climate goals for Germany. Germany is forced now to have the goal of being climate neutral, net zero by 2045. That means that we also have to decarbonize the transport sector by 2045 in line with the climate goals of the European Union under the European Green Deal. And that means that we have to have about 15 million EV on the road by 2030. Currently, we are having 1.5 million EVs on the road, including plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. And the question is, what would it mean for the workforce if we do this transformation, if we are succeeding with this transformation to move ahead with the electrification of the road transport, especially with the electrification of the passenger car vehicle fleet. The next slide, please. Just a short maybe note from our side. For those who don't know Agora Verkehrswende, that stands for the German word for transforming transport. We are part of the Agora think tank family. We have 4 think tanks focusing on energy, industry, agriculture, and transport, and to advise our government with pathways to net zero by the mid of the century. And as we have already a huge commitment to net zero by 90% of the countries, the economy, and also the emissions, we are also bundled together with a lot of countries in Asia, where I also work, especially if it comes to the question, either we will get this done jointly, or we will lose one by one if we don't meet the climate target and make the transition just. The next slide, please, which shows very much, I think, condensed everything what is the opportunity and challenge for the labor market. You see on the very left the column with 1.6 or 1,690 thousand, which means 1.6 million or nearly 1.7 million workers in the automotive sector, in the broader automotive sector. And here I build on what Swati from ADB mentioned, that we included not only the automotive OEMs and the supplier, but also the electric companies, the recycling, the new value chains in batteries and battery management, and the whole industry at the moment in 2020, when we did this analysis, were about 1.7 million. And on the very right side, you see how this workforce could develop in 2030 when we have 15 million EVs on the road. And you see in between the impact factors and the trends which have an impact on the workforce, which makes it difficult to decide when we talk in general about the workforce in the automotive industry in Germany, that what or which trend has a huge impact on the workforce. We were assuming that the market volume will grow, that we will have new technologies in the cars, and that the product mix will be more distinguished, so that the companies would earn more money and also would add more workforce in Europe and in Germany specifically. But as you might have heard and might know and might imagine, under the circumstances now, with having the outcome, still struggling with the outcome of Corona, having the impact on the war in the Ukraine, having the impact of the energy price crisis, the market went down. So we were not succeeding in growing the workforce and the production in the automotive sector. Productivity and offshoring also reduces the workforce in Germany quite a lot. But here the most important takeaway is definitely we will lose jobs in the production and in the supply chain of the combustion engine, but we will also grow jobs in the new battery supply chain, in the new energy sector, in charging infrastructure building, extending of the distribution grids, and that is keeping, quite stable the situation. The impact on electric mobility is quite stable in Germany if we are succeeding with growing the electricity or the electrification of the road transport. The next slide, please, which might look a little bit complicated, but at the end, it's very simple, the question, and I would love to concentrate on the left column, which is called European Premium OEM or European Volume OEM, representing the German OEMs, so to say. And this shows that, only the front runner in the industry will be able to make more profits. That is mentioned in the green square with, for example, plus 30%. So only the front runner in the automotive industry with regard to electrification in Europe will be able to add profits if we accelerate the e-mobility or the e-mobility transformation, which is in line with the climate goals. And if the e-mobility transformation slows down, as it is at the moment, for several reasons we might be also able to discuss, then they will lose profits also. That means to come back to the title of this conference and webinar today, is it a just transition or just a transition? I would say the most unjust development would be no transformation, no transition in the automotive sector, because that would harm, at least in Europe, but this is also the truth in other regions of the world, that would harm most of the jobs in the automotive industry, because this transformation and transition to e-mobility has no alternative if we would like to meet our climate goals and being climate neutral at least by mid-century. Last slide, please. That is also unfortunately simple to read. It shows the annual registrations of EVs in Germany at the moment, as Germany had to cut the subsidies for buying electric vehicles due to the conflicts with our national budget. And it shows that we are far behind with the registrations at the moment. which makes a lot of trouble now for our automotive industry, that currently we lose job because we do not catch up with the numbers we would have to have in the market. Currently, we are registering each day around 1,000 new electric vehicles, but we have to have 5,500 daily registered to meet the climate targets. And that shows that, again, we now have to move ahead with a couple of measures to revive the market for EVs and to ramp up the market in the next years, which I'm quite optimistic that this can take place. But this is the only way, fast transformation to electric mobility, to save the most jobs and to create new jobs in the automotive industry, if we are also able to localize the battery value chain, which is only then the case when we are able to revive and have a more dynamic market than we have at the moment. So again, the outcome of our discussions over the last 5 years is the just transition is the fastest transformation to electric mobility. The most unjust transition is if we do it very slowly or oppose to the transition in the automotive sector. Thank you very much. I'm looking very much forward to the further discussion.
Thank you so much, Christian, for that presentation. I think it's certainly plenty to learn from the German automotive sector there, and lessons for our colleagues throughout Asia as well. I do just want to highlight that I'm aware that there have been a few of you trying to post in the chat and have been unable to do so. We've been working on this, and it should now be resolved. So if anyone would like to put questions in the chat or introduce themselves in the chat, whatever it may be, it should now be possible. But I see, Christian, your presentation has stimulated some activity in the Q&A box nonetheless. So thank you for sending those through to us. Okay, perfect. Next slide, please. So next up, we have Chaitanya Kanuri. Chaitanya is Associate Director of E-Mobility at World Resources Institute India, where she leads on various research and project initiatives across the e-mobility landscape, including on just transition at a national and a state level. Chaitanya has also authored various publications, including guidebooks for EV charging implementation and the electrification of auto rickshaws. So Chaitanya, over to you.
Thank you, Tom. Next slide, please, and the next slide. So following from Christian's presentation on the just transition pathways and considerations that a country like Germany needs to keep in mind, I will be speaking briefly about the e-mobility transition in India. And again, in order to understand the just transition considerations for the e-mobility transition, it's also important to understand how the e-mobility transition is occurring, as well as what it means for India's manufacturing ecosystem or the auto industry. So while Juman focused on the transport workers, I'd like to look at the upstream a little more. So if we see the e-mobility story in India, over the past few years, we note that there has been a rapid growth in electric vehicle adoption. So from about less than 1% in 2018 to 7% in the first quarter of 2024 at an overall level across all modes of vehicle registrations. This has been led by two-wheelers and three-wheelers primarily. And if you see the projections up to 2030 as well, the graphs are a little small, apologies, but you do see that blue line that is sort of ratcheting straight up in the left-hand graph is the two-wheeler adoption that is projected to 2030 by IEA's and other market reports, projections and forecasts. And so from about 1.5 million EV registrations in 2023, we're foreseeing anything between 15 to 25 million EV registrations in 2030. So that is a tenfold growth of the market, accounting for a 30 to 40% EV adoption rate by 2030. So far, we do seem to be on track with this, and this is going to be driven primarily by the two-wheeler and three-wheeler segments, while segments like cars and all may be a little slower with about a 10% adoption rate projected for 2030. Now, this e-mobility growth has also been continuously supported by government initiatives, and even recently, the government of India has renewed their support for the e-mobility across, in the face of a lot of discussion on different alternative clean mobility technologies. The political support for e-mobility remains strong. So recently, the demand side support program has been renewed for another 2 years with a significant allocation for supporting two-wheelers, three-wheelers, electric trucks, and other segments as well. So while this may be similar to other parts of the world, one thing that may be a little different in India is that the overall, much like other developing countries, is that the overall vehicle market is also set to continue growing. So EVs are not a replacement vehicle here or a replacement technology in the overall vehicle fleet. The overall vehicular fleet will also grow. So absolute numbers of ICE vehicles will also be growing in the near future, and EVs will also be growing, albeit at a much faster rate. So what this means is India essentially has a longer time to plan for its just transition. Next slide, please. So why is this significant in the auto industry or the manufacturing sector? India is ranked first in two-wheeler manufacturing and tractor manufacturing across the world. It is the second largest bus manufacturer in the world and the third largest heavy truck manufacturer in the world. That is on the supply side. On the demand side, it's the second largest two-wheeler market in the world and the third largest car market in the world. So that also makes the growing demand for personal vehicles and growing vehicular ownership in India, which is in tandem with its economic growth, makes India a market of specific interest, both globally and for domestic manufacturers when you're looking at changing preferences for vehicle powertrain technologies. And of that, about 5% are exported vehicles. So then if we're talking about vehicular changes, EV transitions in other countries, so India's export markets for its vehicles and auto components include the US, Germany, South Africa, Mexico, Middle East, and Latin American regions. And we do see that some of these, like the US and Europe, are rapidly looking to move to EVs. And so you are also looking at a country which has growing export ambitions and their key export markets also transitioning to electric mobility. And so a faster transition to EV manufacturing and faster localization of EV manufacturing will mean that within the global supply chain, which is sort of reordering, India could gain a competitive advantage or could lose out from its current stance as one of the largest manufacturers in the world based on how it decides to tackle the EV transition. Next slide, please. So there's been a recent study in the past year by iForest on the impacts of the EV transition on jobs in the Indian auto value chain. So there's just two parts of this that I would like to highlight. So if we look at the auto industry, manufacturing jobs account for about 55% of the job roles in the auto sector, while non-manufacturing jobs, which are, say, R&D, repairs and service, dealership roles, charging station, fuel pump roles, and supply chain and logistics roles account for the remaining 46%. And if we see the split of how job roles will be impacted, not necessarily job numbers, but what will be the transition in job roles across manufacturing and non-manufacturing roles. We do see that about the red shows, so there for manufacturing and non-manufacturing roles, we have 2 bars each in the graph on the left, and the gray bar components show the jobs for which job roles for which there are not expected to be any changes between ICEV and EV. So these are fairly overlapping jobs which are not expected to see much skilling change or difference. The ones in blue are required, are jobs which require some retraining or reskilling. The jobs in red in the top bars are the ones in the ICEV value chains that are expected to become obsolete over time. And the ones in green in the EV bars, the bottom bars in each section, are the ones or are the jobs that are expected to be added by the EV transition. So new job opportunities. And overall, if you look at it, you do see that about 30% of the jobs or so will change. So some will become obsolete and some will require significant retraining. However, overall, if you take a look at the overall picture, which is the bottom 2 bars, you do see that there is a slight increase in the total number of job roles and the different opportunities therefore, that will emerge in the EV ecosystem. At the same time, these job roles are not necessarily going to require the same kinds of workers as the current ICEV ecosystem does. So if you see the graph on the right, you see that job roles for lower skilled jobs, so level 2, level 3 jobs, which are more about routine tasks that are conducted under supervision, are actually reducing. So the red columns on the right, in the right graph, show where job losses are expected at different skill levels, and the green show where new job opportunities are coming up. And you do see that in the lower skill levels, there are more job roles that are going to be lost than new opportunities coming up. Whereas if you move into the higher job categories, like level 5, level 6, you do see that there are significantly more roles and opportunities coming up in the EV ecosystem than in the ones that are going to be lost from the ICEV ecosystem. So we are talking about significant retraining, upskilling of workers in order to facilitate the transition. And of course, this doesn't talk about the overall job numbers. And the study does show that there will be a small drop of 8 to 17%, depending on the speed of the transition in the total number of jobs between ICEV and EV by about 2036, 37. So again, a slightly longer time period available for the transition, but and a slight drop in the total number of jobs available in the auto industry if we're talking about a more aggressive EV shift, but more time to also plan for this. Next, please. And this is my last slide. So WRI India, which is the organization to which I belong, has done a study that looks at the key challenges we spoke to a wide range of auto component manufacturers and OEMs across the country to get a pan-India perspective on what the key challenges today are that are obstructing a just EV transition, which in turn I'm hoping through the discussion, we start discussing some of the solution pathways. So what we find is that there is a lack of diversification awareness. And this is because more than 95% of the ICEV value chain, the auto industry, it is comprised of micro, small, and medium enterprises, MSMEs. So there are some 35 to 45 MSMEs that are manufacturing 2,000 ICEV parts. And today, while some of them are aware of the threat posed by the EV transition, they're not necessarily aware of the diversification opportunities, both within and outside the auto sector, and what they should be planning towards. They're also, given that MSMEs are closely tied into existing OEM supply chains, they're also not aware of additional demand and markets from other potential customers towards which they can diversify. So as the total number of EV parts shrinks drastically in the powertrain and OEMs start cutting off their supply chains or drastically altering their supply chains, some of these MSMEs, if they are not aware of the diversification pathways and start planning for their own diversification, may become obsolete at a firm level itself, which in turn, of course, adversely impacts workers and communities. There is also a lack of transition infrastructure at the cluster level. So even if there is some awareness and some intention to diversify among MSMEs or other auto component manufacturers, they need infrastructure support, be it common prototyping or facility centers, more testing and certification labs for component parts, given that these are going to be new parts that they are going to be engineering and tooling, and innovation and incubation centers to ideate and develop R&D for the EV industry, which today at a regional level, a cluster level doesn't necessarily exist. There are a couple of examples where this is happening, but it's mostly been OEMs and large component manufacturers driving that transition with their own private sort of facilities, not cluster level facilities necessarily. There's also unmet reskilling and upskilling needs. So today, EV OEMs are significantly investing in upskilling their own suppliers, and a lot of on-the-job training is also being provided. But this requires significant investments from the firms themselves. And while some institutional programs are being provided by skill development councils and all, they are not adequate for the volume of workers needed today. And this will require that more training and institutional needs do start getting expanded. And finally, there is a lack of access to affordable transition finance. So if we're talking about transition infrastructure at the cluster level, which requires investments or support to firms to upskill their own workforces, there is need for additional financing and investments that are very specific to the auto industry's transition. And while existing schemes may cater to SMEs, MSMEs, and their financing, they may not be specific enough for the retooling requirements or for the specific capital and working capital requirements that auto industries may face. And so this is another aspect where more specific investment programs and financing schemes are needed to actually start facilitating this transition. So that's my presentation. Thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Chaitanya, for sharing your insights and experiences from India. We are running a little bit hot for time, so we will move forward to the panel discussion, for which I'd like to introduce our moderator, Bertrand Gorlu, who is a principal transport specialist at the Asian Development Bank. Bertrand leads urban transport and railways initiatives within ADB's Transport Sector Office, with a focus on emerging areas in the context of transport decarbonisation. He joined ADB in 2010, having previously worked in transportation consultancy, where he held various project director positions. So Bertrand, over to you to take us into our panel discussion, and can I suggest that we stop sharing the presentation deck at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. So it's a pleasure that we're having this seminar. Great presentations, a lot of substance already, and we also have a great panel. Then we can see ourselves on the screen. So nice composition, and we receive perspective from the ITF, WRI India, Agora, Fairchild vendor, and colleagues from the ADB. I also would like to acknowledge the high participation we have today, just like for most of these seminars, and it's nice to see familiar names also among the participants, whether ADB colleagues or colleagues from other organizations or partner institutes. I would like to say hi to everyone. 5 questions, and at the end we will have one bonus question. We'll keep that for the end. Maybe the first one will be on impacts on employment. Impacts on employment have a central role when just transition is discussed. So the question to our panelists will be how a shift toward e-mobility will be changing jobs and labor markets. Maybe the question will go first to Juman, then to Christian and Chaitanya. Please, Juman.
Great, thanks, Bertrand. So I think Chaitanya has partly addressed this already. What we're looking at is a change in what jobs exist and what these jobs look like. And there are, as has been referred to already, a lot of fears. So people are nervous that they are going to be displaced by shifts for e-mobility and broader sustainable transport. And that will mean losses of livelihoods. There are also fears around the new jobs not necessarily having the same pay, security, and protection. So there are fears, I'm not saying these are justified, that the new jobs will come without the protections that have been hard fought, and so they could open up more exploitation. There are also fears around e-mobility being linked to a broader introduction of new technology and new risks around, for example, surveillance, those kinds of issues. It doesn't need to be that way, and that's why it's good to have these kinds of conversations. We see really positive opportunities if the right approach is taken. So, for example, with the right approaches to social dialogue, you can look at retraining, reskilling. It's critical that we are looking at what jobs, what workers are being displaced and how they can be reskilled. So as far as possible, they can move into the new jobs that are coming up. There's also opportunities, again, it's already been referred to, the low level, for example, of women workers. There are opportunities to bring those workers into these new roles in how skilling is done. What we're also doing is doing a lot of work looking at informal workers and how they fit in. One of the things that can go wrong is where e-mobility is brought in. So, for example, things like bus rapid transit, there are situations where the way those have been set up effectively shifts, takes over routes that normally are being used by informal workers and sort of cut and then limits them to just a very limited number of new routes. And then there's no thought given to what implications that has on the people who've been moved out, both communities and the workers. So one approach we've been taking to try and address that is do labour impact assessments, where we actually get workers to talk to other workers to really understand what's happening on the ground. And then that can be fed into the planning that's done and try and address some of these issues. And as I mentioned in my presentation, there's also questions about worker health and safety. And so you can build that into new processes. So you have setups that are at every level, from the manufacturing through to the actual operation. All of that has better working conditions than currently exists. The key for us is that Just Transition isn't an add-on. It's integrated into the overall process from the beginning.
Thank you, Juman. That's lots of substance. Thank you. We're going to Christian, maybe from the perspective of the manufacturing value chain.
Thank you very much for this question. And just to sum it up from a German perspective, I think at the very beginning, there was a fear that we will lose much more jobs than we can gain from this. There were numbers out that half of the workers in the supply chain, in the classical supply chain at the OEMs, at the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 supplier will be lost. But then also in consequence of the study we did jointly with Boston Consulting, it turned out that the balance will be quite stable. So net there will be not a big loss, or it will be nearly the same, but definitely further education, reskilling, requalification is the key. Nearly half of the 1.6 million I was pointing out, 800,000 jobs have to be qualified, reskilled, which is a huge number. Most of the people from the automotive industry say that can be done on their own from the OEM perspective because they have the resources to do so. The huge challenge will be with the suppliers to do the further education and reskilling, requalification on a supplier level, especially as many jobs will not be at the same place, right? So people would have to move from an automotive supplier to, let's say, a battery cell manufacturer in another part of Germany, across Germany, maybe hundreds of kilometers away. So the biggest challenge was seen in the question, how do we transform and transition the jobs in certain regions? And this is where the German government set up around 30 so-called regional transformational networks, where, you know, the industries were discussing how you could also change jobs, well-paid jobs in other industries, in other parts of the industry, but in the same region. And this is then, let's say, sector overarching, which is important to mention that this is currently underway, but it seems to be quite successful. And the second thing is that, let's say, the biggest harm to the supplier industry, which was also pointed out by our metal worker union, IG Metall, is that the supplier have not enough capacities to build a strategy through the transition. They are too small that they have a huge strategy department which says, okay, this is our way through this transition, and at the end we can do different products, different things. And therefore, there's also a big fund which helps those suppliers with capacities and capacity building. What can be their way through the strategy? Because a survey showed that 50% of the companies, smaller suppliers in Germany, didn't have a strategy throughout this transition. So it's a really very ambitious goal to have more companies and to help companies with a strategy, and also to bring together the funding for certain things with a prerequisite that they have a strategy. So only if they first have a strategy, they will get some funding for transition plans. And this is also a tool which is successfully used to transition the jobs in the supply chain of the automotive industry.
Thank you, Christian. And yes, requalification and reskilling and all this environment and lesson are very important. So now we go to Chaitanya, and I should have mentioned it, but every question among the 5 questions we have, we can talk for minutes and minutes. So please, let's keep it short. This is the first question. Let's take the time. Maybe for the other question, we'll keep it maybe to 1 minute maximum. Let's try to make the most of the time that is left to us. But please, Chaitanya, take the time to respond. The first one, we take the time. The other ones will make it shorter. And you told us a lot about this already in your presentation.
Exactly. So no worries, Bertrand. I'm just gonna probably reframe what I said in the presentation in a slightly different perspective. So if we're talking about what are the impacts on jobs or the labor markets, we can maybe look at them at 3 levels. The first is at the national level. So for manufacturing countries like India, that are part of the global supply chain for automotive and for the automotive industry, this is a pivot point where they need to understand how they can improve their competitive advantage, both through increased catering of production to the kind of consumer choices in powertrain technology that are going to be coming up, which is expected to be EV, and in terms of how much they're able to capture that value addition in country. So Christian in his presentation referred to how, unless you have the battery manufacturing localized, there may not be the kind of benefits seen. And that's a similar story for India as well. So if you see India's ICEV manufacturing, most of it is localized actually. And if you see EVs, it is much less so, and it is a lot more dependent on imports. So at the country level, just in terms of the GDP impacts and the overall job market impacts, it becomes imperative to maintain a competitive edge through the transition. At a firm level, we're talking about vehicle OEMs. When we talk about vehicle OEMs or larger component manufacturers, they're definitely better positioned to leverage the e-mobility transition. That is what came out through our study. And however, MSMEs lack the awareness as much and opportunities to market as well. So again, this was something I mentioned, so I'm not going to repeat it too much, but with fewer parts in EVs, fewer component manufacturers are needed. And if that restructuring of the supply chain is going to be happening by the OEMs, then MSMEs are going to be in a passive position where they may just end up left out in the cold. And we do see that there is some vertical integration happening as well in the supply chain, with OEMs bringing more and more of the R&D functions for certain components in-house. And then, of course, the key value adds of the components being moved to like entirely different component systems like batteries and motors. So for the existing assemblies and component systems and the MSMEs therein, I think just getting that access to R&D, retooling, skilling, and understanding what markets exist for them to, even as auto component manufacturers, independent auto component manufacturers, will become critical for them to transition. And at the third level, at the worker level, we have seen that low-skilled workers may be at greater risk of obsolescence, and they will simultaneously lack resources to upskill themselves. And today, policies are looking more at supporting firms in reskilling workers. So maybe there are some grants being given to firms who for reskilling their workforce. But at the same time, can we also consider grants and programs that are directly targeted at workers so that they are able to reskill and upskill themselves for more productive job opportunities in the future? So these are the changes and some of the maybe pathways in terms of how to address them.
Thank you, Tanya. Very clear. So I will not even try to summarize and repeat. In the interest of time, also we'll go to the next question. So the next question will be on women. So according to the ITF, women make up only 17% of the workforce in the transport sector globally, and in Asia it's even a little bit less, at around 15%. How do we integrate more women into what is a male-dominated sector? That is our second question. Maybe because we have not heard from Swati, so I will direct it to Swati first, and then we'll come back to you, Chaitanya. Swati?
Thank you, Bertrand. So I will take the next question to be my longer question. This one I will address very quickly.
Really up to you.
So this is a very interesting question, and within ADB projects, we get this a lot about increasing the gender balance within the workforce when we are financing projects as well, right? The question is over here, what do we mean by integration? At which part of the supply chain and value chain are we thinking of integration? Are we looking at it from an upstream perspective, which is your entire manufacturing supply chain? Are we looking at it from a downstream perspective? The idea, and then we need to start thinking about the issues on quality of jobs, because and this 17% of the workforce that ITF has put out, and there's a similar number even in the renewable energy world, a lot of them are at the admin level, right? People don't move beyond that level. So which is where I'm thinking quality of jobs and how to bring that. One part of it is, so there are two pathways here. One is your existing workforce and how you integrate women more. And one is the entirely new workforce that is directly getting into the electric mobility sector, both upstream, midstream, and downstream, and what needs to be done. So one is the reskilling, upskilling that all the panelists have spoken before me. But on the other side, it's also about integrating more women into the TVET system, putting together policies that help that on the formal side. On the informal side, we are already seeing examples. Actually, India itself has a lot of examples where, because of electric mobility, you have a lot of women now who are actually driving public transport vehicles, which earlier they were not doing, because there's a tag associated on clean, which then makes the whole process clean. So which is why when we think about integrating women, we need to then break this down into the supply chain and value chain and see how each component needs a different approach on integration.
Thank you very much. Yes, and I like this differentiating approach, existing and new, because we have also a lot of new jobs being created. So taking it from the beginning. Chaitanya, any further perspective on this and the role and the space for women in this industry?
So a
And
very complimentary one. So I think Swati spoke about the overall approach to take and the framework in which we can think about integrating more women. But at the same time, so one study we're doing recently looks at front runners that are actually trying to integrate more women. So we have heard various announcements by companies in India that are aiming to integrate more women, both from the manufacturing perspective and from the transport worker perspective. And having spoken to them, we've identified a few strategies that are needed across the board, because there are a lot of challenges still, right? And so one challenge is that women are not plugged into the networks for transport jobs, for the kind of jobs that may come up in the e-mobility sector. So proactive recruitment, be it through campus jobs for higher skilled professions, or through newspaper advertisements. Mechanisms to alleviate family concerns. So many people are concerned about sending their women to work in transport sector jobs because they're seen either as unsafe or largely male dominated. So some companies are looking at things like women's hostels, availability of company transport for women, and some transport side jobs are actually looking at providing cameras for women's safety for the drivers as well, and not just the customers. So certain mechanisms to actually alleviate concerns and safety concerns primarily, and allow women to access these jobs. Group KPIs is another thing we came across, where companies are saying, okay, women may have a lot of different constraints because of which their performance metrics may not actually show up well if they are rated as per standard performance metrics. They may have a lot of flexibility requirements in their working hours, entry times, exit times, etc. And so group KPIs to actually score teams together rather than individual workers is another mechanism that companies are using. Flexible reporting and working hours, of course, having women managers, having workplace forums where you're also sensitizing co-workers, because there are a lot of male co-workers, and if they are not sensitized, then they are going to create an unfriendly atmosphere for women to actually come into and work if it's a new if it's new women that are coming in to take up a new set of jobs, right? So it is a very multi-pronged approach that is needed. And often what is done is one thing is done, like a government provides quotas or permits that are reserved for women. And then when they find that enough women don't take them up, the understanding in the ecosystem is that demand is not there. But never mind the fact that the women often don't have commercial licenses, because a lot of them don't have driving licenses. Especially in India, I think just about 7% of women have driving licenses. And you also have issues like public toilets and all. So for women to access transport work, having a lack of public amenities might also dissuade them. Ergonomics and requirements, like sometimes there's a minimum height requirement, sometimes there's some sort of requirements that actually don't allow the average woman to access certain jobs. So policies, mechanisms, both from companies, governments, as well as enablers like financiers and skill development agencies. All of these are needed in a more comprehensive approach rather than the sort of one-by-one mechanism approach today, in order to actually successfully see that integration. Because this is an opportunity for sure, but a very standardized one policy approach is not necessarily going to see the gains. And a lot of technology transitions and all have happened so far, which have not necessarily seen that status quo change. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a very important topic, and there is, of course, much more to say. And let me also mention that the topic for the next week's webinar will be gender and e-mobility. So we'll continue that discussion. We'll have speakers from UNEP, Annika Berlin, and from ITDP Indonesia, Deliani Siregar. So they present recent UNEP study, so that just been published. So on the impact of e-mobility on gender. So that will be our discussion for next week. Thank you. So now we're moving to the third question. I'll make that reminder that we'll try to keep it short from now on. We had a long response already. I know it's not easy because there is so much to say on each of these questions. So let's please make this effort. So the third question is on community impacts. Electrification of transport will have impact on communities and also beyond the jobs aspect that we have discussed. So the question is, what community impacts do you see relevant for the Asian region? So, and the question will go to Juman, please, and Chaitanya again. Juman?
Great, yeah, thanks. So yeah, I think it's already been mentioned, e-mobility is part of, it's not going to happen exclusively. It's e-mobility with other forms of transport at the same time. And that's critical for when you're looking at broader community aspects. There's big questions, as we all know, in Asian cities already around congestion. And that's going to be how we move forward is going to be very critical in terms of how different urban areas in particular move, and also issues around access. So what we need to see happen is an overall system which looks at the different forms of transport, with e-mobility being one of those, that's designed around users and looks at who needs to get where and considerations for different groups. One of the concerns that's already arising around just transition is the issue of accessibility, where potentially the cost of investment around e-mobility may mean that those are able to access it aren't those only those that are the richest, and therefore other groups aren't able to access those forms of transport. You can also see people who are most needing to use different routes being effectively not able to use them in the same way, and so it sort of further exacerbates inequality, which is a huge problem. So what you need instead is an approach which is really centered on comprehensive, accessible systems that look at the different groups, who needs to use what, and also looks at considerations. We've already talked about women workers and issues around safety. The same applies for women more broadly. So looking at ability to access safe transport at night, for example, is a key issue. Looking at also things around those limited mobility. All of those issues have to be brought in from the outset, and that has to be part of the overall plan. So it just comes back again to an overall plan that brings all these different aspects together, and the mechanisms, the processes to enable that, which means proper social consultation with different communities, with special consideration with those members of the community that we know to be the most vulnerable. Thank you.
Yeah, always fascinating to see access and accessibility central is on all these issues. Thank you for bringing that. Chaitanya, anything to add on that topic?
Again, I'm going to add more from the cluster side, because Juman spoken actually a lot about the community and the consumer side. So if you see the manufacturing auto industry side, it is spatially concentrated in clusters. In India, in Germany, in most countries, there are automobile manufacturing regions. And so, for example, if they're like in one particular state in India, which is automotive manufacturing, out of the 340,000 workers that are directly employed by OEMs and auto component manufacturers in the auto industry, 80% are clustered in just 6 parts of the state. out of like 50 parts of the state or something. And what you get from that is a very high reliance on the auto industry as for the local economy in certain parts of the country. And while this is not as stark as the coal transition, where a lot of times the EV transition is actually occurring in the same places, and therefore EV investments are coming into the same places where ICE EV manufacturing is already taking place. Therefore, it's not as stark. But at the same time, clusters are also different. Some are OEM anchored clusters where OEMs are there, and so if they are bringing in the EV transition, they will bring in the necessary jobs as well regionally. But there are also certain MSME clusters, which are maybe more process-based, which look just at casting and forging and providing component parts, or, they're the smaller tier 2, tier 3 manufacturers that are actually supplying to OEMs that are elsewhere. Such clusters face a sort of double whammy where while they also cater to other industries, they have a high reliance on the auto industry, and they have no anchor OEM that may necessarily sort of lead them through the transition. And so cluster level planning, which is not necessarily something that has been receiving a lot of focus. The just transition conversation is very much at a state level today in India. So that very regional, localized planning is needed. We've already seen in the presentation, me speak about how some of that is transition, infrastructure, cluster level infrastructure for supporting the transition. But some of it is also active planning for market development of firms and economic diversification of the region through active planning strategies. And so that maybe just focusing on that and saying that that is something that is missing today from a regional spatial perspective, and that needs much more focus where local governments and industry associations becoming more involved to actually figure out what the transition plan is at a cluster level. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so now let's move to the next question. That would be on key impacts on economy. So that would be a question to Swati first and to Christian. So can you please describe some of the key impacts on economy of the transition to electric mobility, and tell us maybe how could some of the potential negative impacts be overcome? And again, we are cautious of the time. We have 10 minutes left, so we really have to accelerate and compress it. But I know that you can bring some substance even in short time. Thank you.
So, taking forward what Chaitanya said, there are 2 or 3 different levels when we're thinking of economic impacts. So one is on the automotive's supply chain and the automobile and vehicle manufacturing, producing as well as consuming economy. And then you have the fuel supply chain economy. Both of these in a way start creating, when we are transitioning, we see economic impacts coming from both sides. Employment, while it's a social impact, has economic complications because unemployment typically leads to increase in dependence also on social sector schemes, on unemployment benefits from either the national government or the local government. And this sort of goes hand in hand with, say, decreasing revenues. India is one such example where you're seeing where, as Chaitanya mentioned, you have both ICE and EVs growing. But that's not actually true of most of a lot of the Asia and Pacific region. Eventually, one will have to supplement the other, substitute the other, and then supplement the other. And in this process, because of the volatility that transitions generally undertake and go through, there you will start seeing economic impact in terms of the revenue losses that start happening at the government level on your automobile taxes. Then we come to the fuel supply chain part of it, where you're actually seeing revenues coming in from both consumption as well as production. In a lot of countries, they are a substantial portion of both the GDP as well as the budget, right? So this then leads to what we call, or what will essentially be impact on the fiscal health of the country, which then leads to a larger borrowing pattern. Now, if you translate this at the subnational level, a lot of subnational provinces and governments
Thank you, Swati, very much. Christian?
Yeah, in the interest of time, thank you, Bertrand. I would love to highlight one thing, which normally is maybe already in our mind, but I think it has to be said. It is that from a macroeconomic perspective or from a national economic perspective, it will never be as cheap as today to reach the climate targets, which means, if we do not succeed with the transition as fast as possible, including the electrification of road transport, with having new sales in Europe by at least 2035 to 100%, then definitely the cost of this transformation will be much higher, including adaptation, including loss and damages. So in this sense, I think from a macroeconomic perspective, it makes sense to transition today instead of tomorrow. And I think this is something which is normally not in a discussion, but I think it has to be said that the economic impacts will be much more negative if we slow down this transition or even get stopped.
Thank you, Christian. Great. I think we will leave question 5 aside because it's a big topic, so we cannot cover it in just a few minutes. It was supposed to be on the financing from the various bodies, and it can be a webinar per se. So we'll not cover that, and so we'll move to the unfortunately, but so we'll move to the bonus question. So coming back to the title of this seminar, a just transition or just a transition, huge difference, of course. So the bonus question would be on your vision for the future. Can you briefly outline the top priority that government and other key partners, in your view, should focus on in this very moment in order to promote just transition to e-mobility? So what would be your vision and the key number 1 and 2, maybe recommendation that you would like to put forward? And maybe we can go Juman first, Shaintanya, Christian, and Swati. And Swati will have the honor to close somehow this panel discussion. Juman?
Yeah. Of course. So just very quickly, I think just building what Christian just said around loss and damage, one thing I think we just recognize before, as we set out the vision, is that we do all have a duty to protect against these harms. So for example, under the UN guiding principles, on business and human rights, there is a duty to protect. That's one of the board duties. And there is specifically a requirement under the ILO Just Transition resolution that all financial flows are connected to just transition. And so I think that's important to understand because we actually have this responsibility already set out. And so the vision has to be about how do we achieve that. And for us, the kind of key recommendation to do that would be to do strategic transport plans, which mainstream just transition at the national level and the local level. And of course, that globally this is recognized. And that within that, you have got just transition built in, say, because we're talking to ADB, built into all climate financing. So respect for labor rights and level of union involvement and broader social consultations, those are built into the approaches that are taken, because that is key for us to achieve a way forward that works both for the climate and for social justice moving forward. Thank you.
Wonderful. Could not agree more. Thank you. Chaitanya?
I'll keep it really short. So more data for better planning. I think today India actually does not have adequate data on the automotive value chain, especially given that a large part of it is informal, and there are a lot of indirect impacts. So understanding that better and then using that for better cluster transition planning and support for MSMEs to move up the value chain and to diversify in a inclusive and phased manner. So yeah, I've already elaborated on those, so I'll just stop there.
Wonderful. Thank you. Christian?
Sorry, I was muted. I can only come back to my statement at the beginning. Either we have a just transition, which is a fast one. So recommendation number one is to accelerate the transformation to electrify road transport as much as you can. Or we have an unjust development, which is no transition. So the second thing is that I think this governmental support to have platforms and regional networks for this reskilling or requalification of workers in the automotive industry, also to localize the new supply chain or the supply chain of the new mobility, which includes something we didn't talk about a lot, circular economy in this field, not circular economy from a physical point of view, but also from the business models, to have new business models to create new jobs. That would be number two recommendation, that we need governmental support to transition the jobs in the automotive industry, but slowing it down or just bringing it to a break or to a stop would definitely come as a higher economic cost and with higher job losses.
Thank you, Christian. So we are more strategic transport planning. We are more data for better planning. We have acceleration and higher role by the and government support. And now, Swati, what is your vision adding to this three?
I'm trying to think of something that's not already said. But to be quite honest, I think, yeah, agree with all the points, but and one additional point would be linking transport sector decarbonization policy to larger NDC LTS strategy. So just transition can be a top-down process. It can be a bottom-up process. Honestly, it needs to be from both sides. And the only way to link it from both sides is when we start linking transport sector decarbonization to the larger decarbonization conversation that's happening in the economy, and view it from both a risk and an opportunity lens, more opportunity than risk, which is where the top-down approach comes. The bottom-up approach is a lot about understanding where your impacts are going to be. So it's about data, it's about identification, it's about mapping, it's about understanding what your engagement strategy needs to be with every stakeholder group. Because a lot of times what ends up happening is, because the automobile sector is so powerful financially, there are inherent blockages that come from within the domestic conversation in any context, in any country, as compared to any external conversation, right? So that engagement process has to be built accordingly. And of course, finance, but finance is a conversation for another day. And so thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Swati. And I think that's a great conclusion to our panel discussion and our webinar. We've been looking at the question, but I received a message saying that somehow the question have been addressed in the discussion already. And so it seemed that we are close to the end, so that's the end of the panel discussion. Maybe Tom, you will be closing the session. I hand it over to you.
Thanks.
And
Thanks so much.
to our panelists, of course. I should have started with that. It's been a great conversation, as always. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bertrand. Yes, indeed. So, as you say, most of the questions that have come through have been answered expertly by our panelists in the Q&A. So on the go. So, in the interest of time, let's move to the close. And yeah, Johanna, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Tom. Thanks, Bertrand, for moderating the really interesting discussion. And big thank you to all our panelists for bringing in insights from your perspectives and a lot of new thoughts as well, I think, into the discussion. I think this discussion could have gone on for 2 more hours easily with all the expertise in the table. So I hope we can continue at some other point. I think it's clear that the sector is very complex. So the challenge of just transition will have to be tackled on many different levels, right? So national, subnational, even regional, and then this top-down, bottom-up approach, including it in wider policy development, but also very practical implementation on the operations level, for example. And maybe also this linkage between energy and transport sectors, as we could see in the supply chain. There was a picture that Swati shared. There's a very clear linkage there as well. And I guess what has been said a lot is bringing everyone to the table as well. So that will be an important part of planning, having all key stakeholders discuss. But could I have the next slide, please? I will close off with promoting some of our upcoming events. So actually, as Bertrand already mentioned, we have a gender and e-mobility discussion coming up next week with UNEP and ITDP Indonesia. Also relevant for this topic would actually be our webinar on the 20th of November, where we look at this, the Philippines case of modernizing public transport in the Philippines together with GIZ and ICSC from the Philippines. We didn't actually include these people would have been very interesting addition in this panel as well, but we thought that we would have a separate session on this to really delve into this topic, which was already also discussed during our session here. So you will find in the chat the registration links to these sessions. We'll also share those to our mailing list. And finally, if you wish to help us gather some needs and gaps in the region relating to e-mobility, you can fill in the e-mobility platform survey. I added the link in the chat. And you can find it in that QR code on the screen here. You can also sign up to our mailing list through that link or through that survey. So thank you, everyone. Without further ado, I think we're a bit over time, but I think we managed to cover a lot of ground in this discussion. So thanks, everyone. Again, thank you for our participants, and special thank you for our panelists again and our moderator. Thanks so much, and see you next week then.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.